for the second day in a row, lots of papers are running with the release of Amanda Knox as their front page. This is the Independent's eye publication, pictures of the now free 24-year-old. It takes the story on with the assertion that Knox's freedom leaves the Kircher family back at square one, and cites an anticipated appeal by Rudy Guede, who was convicted of the murder of Meredith Kircher.
And it's the story that's building and building as markets wobble worldwide in response to the euro crisis. France's Le Figaro reports banks are now in the eye of the storm. It looks at the race to rescue Dexia, the Franco-Belgian lender.
There's no rest from financial stories. The UK's Daily Telegraph's previewing Wednesday's address by the Prime Minister David Cameron to his Conservative Party. He's set to warn Britons that they must pay off their debts to aid the country's financial recovery.
Over to China Daily now. It's carrying a story on warnings by Chinese analysts that US trade protectionism is growing. For some time, the US has been claiming that China's been keeping the value of its currency low, which is harming the American economy.
And finally, The Times carries the story of a landmark ruling in favor of a British pub owner, Karen Murphy, who used a Greek satellite decoder to screen a Premier League football match. The ruling by the European Court of Justice is a blow for Sky Sports and ESPN, who retain the only rights in the UK to broadcast the games. Some people are pretty happy about that. We're joined by Bundeep Rangar, the chairman of IndusView. Welcome to the program. Great to have you on. We'll start with Amanda Knox, obviously on the front pages of many papers still, and the Independent. Whatever you may feel about her innocence or guilt, you really must feel for the Kircher family, because as they point out, they're back at square one.
Absolutely. I think in this case, nobody really won, right? The Kircher family is no closer to finding who else was the accomplice by the perpetrator who is convicted. And the Knox family has had to endure 4 years of imprisonment of Amanda, and also apparently $1 million in debt. So you've got a lose-lose situation all around, not to mention the fact that Italy's entire judicial system and police system was on trial by media, if you may. And it really points to the fact that the early stages, whenever such a crime takes place, or alleged crime takes place, is so important, because that's when the forensic evidence got tainted, and that has led to someone potentially losing 4 years of life, not to mention someone guilty may not be
I mean, obviously the Kircher family, all they want to do now is gain closure by finding out who was the accomplice then, if it wasn't Amanda Knox and it wasn't her former boyfriend. And that's, as you say, so difficult now, because the key time is immediately after the crime, isn't it, when all that essential information is gathered, and because there were so much mistakes there, then I wonder whether they will ever find out now.
It's too late for that, I presume, because contamination of evidence has occurred, unless something completely drastically new comes to light, or the person who's been convicted of this, brings new facts to, or new persons on board in terms of the story of what actually happened, unlikely to change anything. And it really kind of sets the stage for, how you treat incidents like this, where the burden of proof is on the prosecution for an above reasonable doubt conviction, where a lot of things can be contested. In this case, clearly forensic evidence.
Are you among those who are slightly uncomfortable with the whole media circus that surrounds things like this, and then people talk of a book deal and a movie deal? Yes, Amanda Knox has spent 4 years in prison, and she's entitled to do what she wants afterwards, but there still is, there should be a bit of caution in approaching some of these things.
Well, I guess the challenge really is, how much is the case judged by the media prior to the judiciary announcing its own results, and that's where the danger is. What happens post facto is a little different. Now that she's out there, she's free to do what she wants, and clearly a movie is something being talked about. It's a way for the family to perhaps recover some of the money they've spent on this. But I believe the real danger is during a trial by media is the more dangerous part. 11 books are out, there's a film out on it already. Italy's judicial system's on trial at a time when there's a lot of allegations of just corruption within the system, and we've seen Berlusconi get away time and time again. We want to make sure that,
moving into other issues.
Let's not get into Berlusconi now, but let's look at the Belgian Franco Bank Dexia. Of course, its shares all over the place since the beginning of this week, and finally, the board had to meet. They had to discuss and talk about what to do, how to rescue this lender. Many are now saying, this is just the beginning, this is what we've been fearing, European banks in serious trouble, this is the start. What's your interpretation?
Sally, we've had this conversation so many times on this show about just how to contain what is ostensibly 2% of Europe's GDP, which is the Greek economy, which can be effectively contained if there's a concerted political and financial action by the rest of the European member states. And it has time and time again failed. For the past year, we've seen the Greek situation, from various metaphors from the Greek tragedy to now the lack of austerity measures kicking in, and certainly the lack of growth there. So the big danger here, of course, is that that debt crisis is now going back into being a banking crisis. And you all have bad memories of the banking crisis. We do not want a repeat of that. We don't want Greece to be the Lehman of Europe, and for that matter, Europe to be the Lehman of the rest of the world.
Certainly, this sends some pretty ominous signals.
Absolutely, and that's why I think the French and Belgian governments have come to the rescue, because what's happening is banks are not lending to Dexia. They can't borrow in the interbank markets, and that's a scary sign, because that's happened with Northern Rock in our country.
Where do you stand, though? Are you among those who are very pessimistic that believes, yes, Greece will default, it will cause serious mayhem, and we're in for a very tough time ahead? Or are you a bit more positive about the outcome? Do you think the Eurozone leaders and others will prevent a disaster from happening?
My concern is that we'll go the former route, only because even if they move, as you pointed an option two, it'll happen too late. And even if it's last minute, by that time the confidence has been deeply shaken, like we saw with the US.
Is the G20 meeting in Cannes beginning of November too late?
Possibly, yeah. We have 4 weeks ahead, and these things move really fast, and you don't want a cascading effect. There's already a crisis of confidence. This just increases that.
Well, the Prime Minister, David Cameron, says there's something you can do now, and it's in the Daily Telegraph. Well, I think it's being pitched as a bit of a motivational speech, isn't it? Help us deal with this crisis. Pay your credit card bills, work hard, and let's stick to the plan.
And also, as well, it says in this article that this is likely to be seen as a direct appeal to women, which I think, come on.
That part I didn't get.
No.
Well, it depends on if you have a spouse who maxes out on the credit card. Maybe you will get it then.
Not the overspenders in this
I love the way, presidents and prime ministers now latch on the credit card, because remember, Obama used the credit card and a toaster as a metaphor for it. When a toaster explodes, they should have a warranty. When credit card companies charge too much interest on your credit cards, they should have a warning and some kind of warranty against it. I guess because we all have credit cards, it's one way to reach the electorate, because we know the Tories' latest polls are not that much in their favor. So here's Cameron preparing for his speech saying, let me attach something that UK, by the way, has 2/3 of all Europe's consumer debt.
But
so it's a good way to get into the
I must admit, when I sort of saw this, I thought, we're coming up for Christmas, obviously.
People are going to
spend. Such an important time for our economy, for our retailers, for our high street. And he's telling us to pay off our debt. We're already tight for cash. So if we're paying off our debt, that means we haven't got really anything to spend. Don't they want us to go out and spend and get our economy back on its feet by buying goods, paying for services? Isn't that what they want us to do?
And historically, the U.S. economy is let out of recession by consumer spending. And here, of course, you've got another reason for consumer spending.
So, I mean, here he is telling us, pay off your debt, let's be frugal,
but isn't there
and yet there's nothing really fueling our economy.
Sword, because those interest rates on those credit cards are quietly creeping up, and people sometimes don't actually notice it, but the banks are sending out those letters telling you we're increasing those rates.
It isn't bad, and debt has always financed growth. The question becomes whether it's on a personal level or a country level, if that debt and the debt reservicing exceeds your income, and that's maybe where the balance lies.
I would imagine, the big retailers and others, if they listen to him make this speech later and he does say all this, they're thinking, well, thanks a lot.
Right, and you're actually right. Ahead of the, retail sales are like 2/3 during Christmas time, so it's not the best timing.
Okay,
but it's an election thing, I'm telling you.
Well, let's talk about a lady who's a bit of a hero right now, for some anyway. She took them to court over this decoder, David and Goliath. So you could characterize it any way you want. But do you think the networks that control sports will be worried about this?
You know what? I love this story, because when I was younger and growing up in India, the state broadcaster had a monopoly, and the way for Star TV, affiliated and owned by News Corp, affiliate of Sky, got into the Indian market, was beaming via satellite and circumventing the terrestrial broadcaster. And he had all these dishes go up on different buildings, and this band called Dishwalla was a reflection of the Dishwallas that went up, broadcasting locally by getting a satellite signal. Right. Now it's tastes their own medicine.
Yeah, exactly.
Back in their home turf, and they can't do much about it. So I'm actually quite excited about this.
I think many people are, to be honest, Bundeep.
We'll see how it plays out, because there's still some more legal wrangling to go through. But Bundeep Rangar
she got the first round, though, didn't she?
yeah, kind of. But it's not over. Thanks very much for coming in. A quick reminder of the main news: American student Amanda Knox has arrived back home in Seattle after being cleared of murdering her British flatmates. That's it.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.